The topic of F-35s and other advanced weaponry going to the UAE has been a subject of scrutiny and discussion in Israel since the Emerging Peace Initiative was announced 2 weeks ago, with officials both in Israel and in the U.S. claiming the arms deal are not directly tied to the normalization deal between the two countries. For more on that, we're now joined by former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danon. Thanks so much for being with us. So I guess the first question is Netanyahu for or against the sale? Because Yediot Achronot is publishing today that Netanyahu has been pushing for it for over 2 years now.
Our policy regarding this issue is very clear. We are committed to make sure that we have the edge on those issues, and we are grateful for the U.S. position on that. I want to remind you and the audience that in 2008, the Congress passed a very clear legislation that paved the line and paved the road to make sure that Israel will continue to have the qualitative military edge. So when we discuss those issues with our colleagues in Washington, we are committed to continue to have that edge. It's crucial for our security, and we will continue to speak about it. We don't do it through newspapers or televisions. We do it directly in quiet negotiations.
Okay, but are there conflicting views on this between the Mossad and the Defense Ministry?
Sometimes in the past you have different opinions. It happened in the past when I served at the UN. We are working very closely with few countries in the Gulf, not only the UAE, mainly against the threat of Iran. And yes, we are even selling arms to some countries. We are selling technology to some countries. We will continue to do that. But at the same time, we have to make sure that our Air Force, our troops, our engineers will have that edge that I was referring to.
But what sort of weaponry has Israel been supplying to the UAE in the last few years? Because it has been published that for more or less 8 years since the assassination of El Mafrouch, Israel has been providing weapons to the UAE. Is that correct?
So I will not go into details, but today in Israel we have a very clear process from the Ministry of Defense that actually gives permission to export knowledge, to export weaponry, and those private companies that they want to do so, they come to the MOD, they get the clearance, and yes, a few countries got clearance to sell technology, to sell equipment to key countries in the Gulf.
But I must ask you, you've been serving in New York and very close to Washington for quite a few years. What sort of leverage does Israel even have on the U.S. if the U.S. decides to go ahead with a deal of F-35s from the U.S. to the UAE? Can Israel do anything to stop it at all? Or is it just an internal debate here that is basically has no ability of really changing the decision in Washington?
So when you read the language of the legislation, you understand that there is a process of dialogue, of consultation. At the end of the day, it's a decision of the U.S. administration what to do and how to do it. And if you look back in history, we were able to change the construction of the agreements, not to block the agreements completely. For if the U.S. wanted to sell certain kinds of aircraft to a country in the region, they sold that despite our opposition. But in terms of what the equipment that was in the aircraft, what level of technology, I think over there is more flexibility. That was our experience in the past.
We see Secretary of State Mike Pompeo here on a very important day for the Republican Party. He's coming here for what, Danon? Is he here to close the deal between the UAE, or is it around the arms deal, or is it around something bigger that has to do with a regional peace summit?
So I think the main reason, unfortunately, it's still the aggression coming from the Iranian regime. We are involved in the attempt of the U.S. to reapply sanctions against the Iranian regime. It's not going so smoothly in the Security Council, so they want to gather support for their move. We support them on that, and also to try to see if maybe there will be more countries following the UAE that will normalize their relations with Israel. We are open. We have a quiet negotiations. I can attest that from my experience in the last 5 years, we worked with many countries, including Muslim countries, that do not recognize Israel publicly, and we are optimistic that in the near future, more countries will normalize their relations with Israel.
We're seeing a first flight. It was actually his flight, Pompeo's flight, that took off from Tel Aviv to Sudan today. Are we due to see any commercial flights on that route, you think, soon?
I think the flights to Dubai and Abu Dhabi will come much faster than the flights to Khartoum. But I think the very fact that we have a dialogue, it's important. And I think we will see more countries, not only in the Gulf, we speak a lot about the Gulf, but also in North Africa and other areas which are strategic for us. We are looking forward to open the doors with them.
Okay, last, before we part, can we say congratulations? Are you moving to Australia?
I'm in Tel Aviv. I enjoy my time in Israel. There are a few offers that I'm considering, but as of now, I'm here in the Holy Land.
Okay.